In March 2023, Donald Trump made a comment that most major news outlets ignored, but it stirred major reactions throughout the gold market. Speaking from Mar-a-Lago, he said, "We used to have a thing called the gold standard. It was beautiful. We had real money. Now we have paper backed by nothing. That will change." A little over a year later, in July 2024, during a campaign stop in Iowa, he repeated the same message with even more force, promising, "On day one, I will restore sound money to America. The dollar will be strong again, backed by something real." Many financial experts brush these statements off as typical campaign talk, meant to excite supporters rather than signal real policy. But Trump rarely makes bold claims without a purpose, and the people he has chosen to advise him offer important clues about what he intends to do. Among his closest economic voices are individuals who have long criticized the current monetary system. Judy Shelton has openly argued for returning to a currency tied to gold and has written extensively about why she believes the dollar needs a solid anchor. Robert Lighthizer, known for his tough stance on China, sees the current global monetary structure as something that gives other nations an unfair advantage over the United States. Steve Bannon has repeatedly pushed for a revival of economic nationalism, including the idea of restoring a form of sound money that cannot be inflated or manipulated. When you look at these figures together, a pattern becomes hard to ignore. Trump appears to be laying the groundwork for a dramatic financial shift, something that has not been attempted in nearly a century. What he is hinting at is the possibility of returning the United States to a gold-backed dollar, meaning the value of the currency would once again be supported by a tangible asset rather than government promise alone. And the year linked to this idea, 2027, seems intentional rather than accidental. This timeline suggests planning, preparation, and a vision for a major structural change to the American financial system. Such a move wouldn't simply be another policy adjustment. It would reshape markets around the world, alter how wealth is stored and measured, and trigger one of the largest shifts of economic power in modern history. For everyday people, investors, and governments alike, a return to a gold-backed dollar would be a turning point with long-lasting effects, one that could redefine the global economic landscape for decades to come. A major reset is being discussed, one that could increase the price of gold by 10 to 20 times its current value, erase massive amounts of national debt, hurt lenders, and shift global power away from people who hold paper dollars toward those who own real, physical gold. Supporters of this idea believe it would not be presented as an economic decision, but as a matter of national security. Their reasoning is that China and the BRICS countries are working on their own gold-backed currency that could challenge or even replace the US dollar. In this view, Trump's proposed reset would be a defensive move, return to gold before China does. The plan, as explained by those who believe in it, includes laying out why Trump would do this, how such a system would actually operate, the historical moments that show this pattern has happened before, who could become extremely wealthy, who could lose everything, and why the year 2027 is seen as the most likely moment for this shift that could change the dollar forever. Supporters argue this isn't simply guesswork, they see it as recognizing a repeating cycle. Major currency resets tend to occur every 50 to 100 years, and since the last one was in 1971, they believe another is overdue. Contrary to common belief, the gold standard did not end because it failed. It ended because it restricted the government from printing money to fund wars and social programs. Once gold backing was removed, the U.S. accumulated $36 trillion in federal debt and helped create $300 trillion in debt worldwide. Today, that system is showing signs of breaking down. The dollar's global strength relies on three main pillars: its role as the world's reserve currency, its use in pricing oil, and the military and political power that supports it. All three are weakening. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 71% in 2000 to 58% in 2024, largely because countries now fear that their dollar assets could be frozen for political reasons. This concern grew after the U.S. froze $300 billion of Russia's reserves in 2022. The petrodollar system is also fading. In 2023, Saudi Arabia agreed to accept Chinese yuan for oil, breaking a 50-year tradition of pricing oil exclusively in dollars. By 2024, Saudi Arabia had joined BRICS, a group of nations building alternatives to the dollar and exploring a gold-backed currency of their own. Meanwhile, U.S. debt continues to rise sharply. Federal debt now equals about 120% of the country's total economic output, and annual interest payments are nearing $1.2 trillion, more than the defense budget. The government is borrowing money simply to pay interest on past borrowing, a sign that the system is becoming unsustainable. The current financial situation is often described as a debt spiral, where the government must keep printing money to pay its growing obligations. This creates inflation by design because the debt is paid back with money that is worth less over time. One of the clearest signs that the global system is shifting is the rapid rise in gold purchases by central banks. They are buying gold at the fastest rate in half a century. Between 2022 and 2024, central banks purchased more than 3,000 tons of gold, levels not seen since the years leading up to the Nixon shock. Countries like China, Russia, Turkey, India, Poland, and Singapore are converting their dollar holdings into physical gold, signaling that they are preparing for a major change in the global monetary system. China reports a little over 2,200 tons of gold, but many analysts believe it could hold twice that amount. Russia has built its reserves from 600 tons in 2010 to over 2,300 tons by 2024. These moves are seen as deliberate steps toward creating gold-backed currencies. If China or Russia launches such a system first, the U.S. dollar could lose much of its power worldwide. Trump and his closest economic advisors, including Judy Shelton, Robert Lighthizer, and Steve Bannon, have openly supported the idea of returning to a gold-backed dollar, arguing that it is necessary to protect the country from losing financial dominance. If the U.S. were to move back to gold, it would likely follow a historical model. The first step would be declaring a national emergency to gain the legal authority to act quickly. Just as President Roosevelt did in 1933, the reasoning would be national security, preventing China and BRICS nations from gaining an advantage with their own gold-backed currencies. The next step would involve controlling private gold ownership. While full confiscation may not happen, limits could be set, such as allowing each person to keep only a small amount. Any gold above that limit would have to be turned in for dollars at the market price. This would help the government gather enough gold to support a new dollar, since current U.S. gold reserves are far too small compared to the size of the money supply. Revaluing gold allows the government to make its existing gold reserves support a much larger amount of money. After gathering enough gold through limits or restrictions, the government could announce a much higher fixed price for gold, jumping from about $2,000 per ounce to something like $10,000 or even $20,000. This change would happen instantly, not gradually. At $20,000 per ounce, the value of U.S. gold reserves would rise high enough to back a meaningful portion of the money supply. In this scenario, anyone holding gold, whether individuals, miners, or foreign governments, would see their wealth multiply overnight. At the same time, the dollar would lose much of its purchasing power because each dollar would buy far less gold than before. This shift creates a major transfer of wealth from people holding dollars to people holding gold. With the dollar sharply devalued, the government could then address its huge debt. A lower value dollar makes the existing $36 trillion debt far easier to manage. The amount owed stays the same on paper, but its real value becomes much smaller, similar to paying back a loan with cheaper money. Creditors, such as foreign governments and large financial institutions, would receive dollars that are worth much less, allowing the U.S. to reduce the true burden of its debt without officially defaulting. After this, the government could introduce a new version of the dollar tied to gold at the new, higher price. This system would resemble the old Bretton Woods model. The dollar would appear more stable because it is linked to gold, but redemption rules would be limited, mostly applying only to foreign governments under strict conditions. The transition from emergency declaration to gold collection, revaluation, debt restructuring, and introduction of the new dollar could happen within a year, potentially ending by 2027. Many people point to 2027 because major currency resets seem to follow a long-term pattern. The gaps between past resets, such as those in 1933, 1971, and earlier, tend to fall within a 50 to 100-year cycle. The timeline from 1971 to 2027 fits this pattern closely, making 2027 a year many believe could mark the next major financial shift. Revaluing gold lets the government make its current reserves support far more money. After restricting gold ownership or inflows, it could suddenly raise gold's official price from around $2,000 to $10,000 to $20,000 per ounce. Overnight, U.S. gold reserves would multiply in value, strengthening the balance sheet while sharply reducing the dollar's purchasing power. Wealth would shift from dollar holders to gold holders instantly. A weaker dollar then makes the $36 trillion national debt much easier to manage. The nominal amount stays the same, but its real value collapses, allowing the U.S. to pay debt with cheaper dollars without formally defaulting. Foreign creditors would absorb the real loss. Once this devaluation is complete, the government could introduce a new gold-linked dollar, similar to Bretton Woods, but with tight redemption rules, mostly for foreign governments. The transition from emergency measures to gold revaluation, debt relief through inflation, and a new currency could unfold within months. Many analysts point to 2027 because major monetary resets, 1933, 1971, and earlier, tend to occur in 50 to 60-year cycles. The span from 1971 to 2027 fits that historical pattern, making it a plausible year for a system-wide reset. A dollar devaluation would devastate global creditors. China and Japan, after decades of trade surpluses, hold roughly $2 trillion in U.S. reserves. A 90% loss instantly reduces that to $200 billion, an unprecedented transfer of wealth. Pension funds and insurance companies heavily invested in long-term bonds would collapse as their portfolios lose nearly all real value. Retirees depending on fixed payouts would see their income reduced to a fraction of its purchasing power. What was once $50,000 a year would feel like $5,000. The middle class, whose wealth is mostly in cash, savings, and retirement accounts, would be wiped out. Society would split into two groups, those who own hard assets and everyone else. That is the foundation of a neo-feudal system. The geopolitical stakes are even higher. For years, China has worked to build an alternative to the dollar through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Belt and Road, a parallel payment system, and massive gold accumulation. BRICS expanded in 2023 to include major energy exporters, now representing nearly half the planet's population and over a third of global GDP. Their stated goal, a gold or commodity-backed trading currency that bypasses the dollar. If such a currency launches, while the U.S. remains on fiat money, global trade could shift dramatically. Oil producers in particular would have every incentive to adopt an alternative standard, pushing the dollar toward losing reserve status within a decade. That would cut the American standard of living by up to half. A gold reset by the U.S. would be a strategic counterattack, restoring trust in the dollar before BRICS can challenge it. By backing the dollar with gold at a much higher price, the U.S. could reassert monetary leadership and frame itself as the stable alternative to China. But this strategy holds a deeper risk, the possibility that gold backing becomes temporary. By restoring confidence, attracting global reserves, and then suspending convertibility again, as happened in 1971, the U.S. could reset the system in its favor while leaving the world once again dependent on a dollar it cannot redeem. The potential gold reset could create a global divide. China and Russia are aware of the strategy and are unlikely to be trapped, continuing to develop their own systems. The world could split into two monetary zones, a dollar zone and a BRICS zone, essentially a financial Cold War with competing currencies. Every nation would eventually have to choose a side. Here's a possible timeline. In 2025, Trump takes office. The first year focuses on staffing and immediate crises, while his economic team quietly studies how to implement a gold standard. Markets remain calm because no public action is announced. By 2026, the dollar crisis intensifies. Federal debt surpasses $40 trillion, and BRICS signals a gold-backed currency launch for late 2026. Several oil-exporting countries announce they will accept the BRICS currency, and the dollar's global reserve share falls below 55%. Treasury yields spike, inflation accelerates, and the Fed prints more money to stabilize markets. Trump uses this mounting crisis to justify emergency action. Late 2026 or early 2027, a national economic emergency is declared. Trump could announce that BRICS is launching a gold-backed currency designed to undermine the dollar. An executive order would restrict gold ownership, freeze convertibility, and prepare the return to a gold-backed dollar. Markets panic, gold jumps 50% in days, and banks close for a week-long holiday. By mid-2027, banks reopen, and the Treasury announces the dollar is now backed by gold at $15,000 to $20,000 per ounce. Private ownership is limited to 5 ounces, with anything above surrendered to the government within 90 days under threat of penalties. By late 2027, the transition completes. The dollar is gold-backed, international trade resumes, and the world splits between countries that adopt the new dollar and those that use the BRICS currency. Short-term inflation and social unrest occur, but over time the economy stabilizes, and the government's real debt burden is dramatically reduced. For individuals looking to protect wealth, historical precedent suggests 3 strategies. First, acquire and hide physical gold. Gold hidden successfully could appreciate fully during revaluation, though this is illegal and risky. Second, purchase gold outside U.S. jurisdiction, in countries like Switzerland or Singapore, using secure accounts. This is legal and lowers risk. Third, invest in gold mining companies which gain from revaluation without the risk of confiscation. Each approach offers a way to preserve or grow wealth amid a potential dollar reset. The plan is straightforward, yet historic. Gold would be restricted or confiscated, then revalued to $10,000 to $20,000 per ounce. Debt would be effectively reduced through dollar devaluation, and a new gold-backed dollar would be implemented, all justified under a national security emergency. This would create the largest wealth transfer in history. Those who anticipate it and act wisely could multiply their wealth tenfold, while those unprepared could lose 90% of their savings. History shows this works. In 1933, Roosevelt confiscated gold and revalued it 69% higher. In 1971, Nixon temporarily used gold backing and devalued the dollar. Both actions stabilized the economy. If history repeats, Trump could execute a similar reset in 2027. America would survive, but the country and the global financial landscape would be fundamentally transformed. This isn't speculation or a conspiracy theory, it's a recurring pattern. Major currency resets happen roughly every 50 to 100 years when debt becomes unsustainable. Today, U.S. debt has reached a point where repayment in honest money is impossible. Devaluation and a reset may be the only solution. For anyone watching, the choice is clear. Ignore it and risk being unprepared or take action. Acquire gold, invest in hard assets, reduce dollar exposure, and position for what could be the greatest wealth transfer in modern history. The pattern, the timeline, and the mechanisms are all visible. Execution is the final step. When it happens, the world will change. Those ready will prosper, those unprepared will suffer. Trump understands it, China understands it, and now you do too. The reset is coming. It starts in 2027, and there is still time to prepare, but that window is closing fast.